Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of B2B Revenue Leaders. Your host today is myself, Sam Shepler, subbing in for Dustin for a special episode where we talk to the founders of Case Study Buddy, Joel Klettke Jen Enns. Testimonial Hero actually acquired Case Study Buddy in March of 2024. In this episode, we dig into their backstory around how they started Case Study Buddy, entrepreneurial lessons, and then toward the back half of the episode, we segue into customer storytelling related topics, why customer stories are more important than ever, and Jen and Joel's best tips for how to get people to agree to be featured in a video testimonial or case study. Again, I'm Sam Shepler, founder and CEO of Testimonial Hero, and I hope you enjoy this special episode. Alrighty, welcome to another episode of B2B Revenue Leaders. I am Sam Shepler, CEO at Testimonial Hero. I am jumping in today for your typical host, our VP of Revenue, Dustin. And I've got a very special episode today with Joel Klettke and Jen Enns from recently Case Study Buddy, who Testimonial Hero actually just completed the acquisition of in March 2024. So I'm really excited to have Joel and Jen on the show today to touch on the founding story of Case Study Buddy, the history of the company, how did they build the business to where it was, and also talking customer storytelling. Why are customer stories more important than ever? And sharing tips and learnings from the hundreds and, dare I say, thousands of customer stories that Jen and Joel have contributed to. Jen and Joel, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And just to lay the groundwork for listeners, maybe if we could just get a brief intro. Joel, why don't you kick it off? We'll just do a 30-second intro for both of you.
Sure. So I'm Joel. My background prior to Case Study Buddy was in conversion copywriting. I came out of the SEO and agency side of things. That's where I originally met Jen and where we first worked together. But my background's really been on the copywriting side of things, the conversion side of things. Case Study Buddy started as a side project off the side of our desks. We'll get more into that later. But yeah, that's been my past. And at this point now, I have a keen interest in the customer marketing side of things, still really interested in the conversion side and exploring, obviously, what's next from here after the acquisition of Case Study Buddy. So that's me.
Awesome. Fantastic. And Jen, give us a little bit of your background and how you met Joel.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm Jen Enns, co-founder of Case Study Buddy. We've been at Case Study Buddy for the past 8 years. And prior to that, as Joel said, we worked at a digital agency together. And he was the SEO guy. I was the account manager, doing the deals, working with clients, working on account strategy as it relates to digital marketing. And yeah, we just worked really well together. And we both went out on our own, started our own consultancies, and we just connected after that. And Joel had this great idea about Case Study Buddy. He bought the domain and he approached me, and I just loved the idea of selling through a customer's voice versus made up marketing slogans. And yeah, just from there on, we built it from the ground up.
I love that. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs want to know about how to get the business off the ground initially, right? Because sometimes that can be the most challenging thing. What were some of the early challenges that you faced, and how did you ultimately overcome them to get to the point where, eventually a 7-figure agency or productized service?
I think early days we had the huge benefit of the fact that we both had other things going on. Jen was running her agency really successfully. I was consulting and freelancing on the copy side. And because it was a services business, really there wasn't a lot of overhead from day one. And that's a unique situation. Not everybody has the benefit, but I want to be honest on that point, because we were able to start from a place of power, having other revenue streams, other sources of income. I think that eventually became a bit of a liability as things started to grow under their own steam. In the early days, you have all the challenges you'd expect in terms of figuring out your price point and figuring out how to scale, and some of our early hires or contractors navigating, okay, what sort of foundation do we need to have to build on from here? But I think, at least from my perspective, the challenges for us really started when we had the problem of growth. The company was doubling and then quadrupling and going very quickly. It became obvious the idea had legs, and especially on the operations side, we both really started to hit the wall of our own time and availability. We were already at that point spread really thin, trying to be all the things in the business. So one of the first key kind of obstacles that I think we overcame together was bringing in Morgan, the very first engine of the business, our very first ops person. The difference that made in what we could do, where we could focus. I wish we'd done it so much earlier, but as a new founder of a multi-person team, it can be hard to know when to make the decision on when can we hire, when can we afford to bring in this more full-time person. And the year that we did, I think I'm remembering correctly, that was the year that things really quadrupled and we got close to that 7-figure mark for the first time. We didn't have the challenges of debt or that kind of thing. We had a good idea that it was pretty obvious from the beginning there was people that would pay for what we did, but laying some of that initial foundational stuff was pivotal. And then once we had growth, that became the problem to try to manage. And I think for a long time we were chasing to try to get ahead of or get back in control of the momentum we'd created together.
Yeah, and I'd say also just one thing that helped us get off the ground to get going initially too, just further to Joel's point, we got in the weeds pretty deep. We were both tackling the execution side. I'm interviewing Joel, writing. We had proposal pricing, taking on ops deals, project management, you name it. Joel and I wore all the execution hats, and in ways that was very beneficial because it enabled us to really understand what it took to produce something of quality and really understand what we needed to hire. And so we took all of that and it helped inform next steps in that chaos because, yes, we wore a bajillion hats and that was too much and we ran out of time to be able to run all the things with the growth. So it enabled us to really have a good perspective to know what to do next.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think that is, particularly when you have a co-founder, figuring out how to have that division of responsibilities is so key, right? I'm curious, from what I've seen, you guys both have thought of that really deeply, and you've carved out different areas of the company that you had different responsibilities for, and that worked really well. Maybe talk us through that and how you figured that out over time as you got started. How did you figure out where that division of responsibilities would be between you two as founders?
Yeah, I'm glad it seems like we thought about that deeply because the truth is, it was a wild ride. I think in the early on stages of Case Study Buddy, bringing Jen in, the initial thought, at least on my end of things, was Jen had so much experience on the project management and the growth side. She was hugely influential in growing the agency we'd both been at, and so that biz dev side of things really early on, that from my seat, that was where Jen might sit or what she might do. But as the company grew and progressed, I think both Jen and I are really type A. We like to be involved in all the stuff. I think, interestingly too, we're both capable of being involved in all the stuff. And so our roles actually flip-flop throughout. Jen mentioned earlier she did a lot of the project management, account management stuff early on, and some of the biz dev elements. And then later on, early on, I was more on the operations side of things and helping develop the formats and the team. It's not that there was no overlap. Of course, like Jen said, we worked on a lot together. As the company matured and grew, though, again, those kind of swapped. I moved more into the marketing, sales, biz dev. There's a period out of necessity I wore the account manager hat for a while. And so I think we had a notion of our personal strengths. I think what's interesting, though, as the company goes through different stages and different growth spurts and different areas, that changed a lot. I think that was, if we're honest, one of the things that could be a struggle at times when you have two people that want to be involved, want to make a difference, want to have an impact. That's a really great thing and I think crucial for a partnership, but finding a way to divide that up and then meaningfully keep that divided up for the team, I think can be really hard. You've run into this situation where if you're not careful, people are wondering, who do I talk to for this issue or that issue? Who do I go to with this or that? So we certainly weren't perfect on that front. I think nearer the end of things, we had more of a clear division of where we were and what was making us each happiest, where we felt most effective, where we felt either out of our depth or just less interested. So I think we got better at that as the company went on, but at least my original vision or idea for that, it didn't play out that way. And I think in the end, that was a good thing.
Yeah, growth demanded different things from each other. And I think one other thing was even just as we went into enterprise, that changed stuff so massively. And there's just the demand on the legal side and going through contracts with billion-dollar companies. Like, it was not a skill either of us had, but we had to figure it out. And so we did. And we got there. We figured out how to divide and conquer, but it was like, you're building the plane as it's flying. So it was not just, oh, we just figured it out. It was chaos, for sure.
Yeah, I think to her credit too, one thing Jen really pushed for throughout was to try to have more dialogue around that ongoing. And it can be really tricky. Again, like we had the challenge of growth. And when there are so many other things that you want to be, projects you want to be diverting your attention to and things that need to be set up, it can be difficult to come back to and continue to have like discussions and remind yourselves what you're in it for and to define those things. I think Jen, to be fair, is much more plugged into that side and did a much better job of, working to try to bring us back to those things. And that's a takeaway, I'll take from this whole experience is just the importance of that. And I think Jen was wise to recognize that stuff early on. So she led a lot of the discussions around trying to make that happen. And like I said, we weren't perfect at by any means, but it's something that unless you're really intentional about it, it's not going to happen by accident.
Yeah, that's such a good point on just having that ability to actually communicate really effectively, right? As co-founders, so crucial. And it sounds like that was always something that you two were able to do. And I think it's so key when you have a co-founder. And just, there's only about 4% of all businesses that make it to 7 figures in revenue. You two have built Case Study Buddy to over 7 figures in revenue, and it was sold and we acquired it, right? You had an exit. So that really puts you both in a very rare position and a place that not a lot of entrepreneurs really get to experience and get to achieve. What are some of the biggest learnings along the way that you would pass on to other entrepreneurs, particularly in the productized services and agency space?
There's a lot. I think investing in quality talent will reap benefits endlessly for you. I think in some terms where we wanted to be tight with our budgets, we had to make decisions around hiring where we were probably a little narrow focus with our budgets on hiring. And I think, when we made the jump to invest in quality talent, it was just game changing. Just people that really care about their craft, who are experts in their craft. It took us from here to here. And yeah, I would say invest in quality talent. For me, too, I think is just twice before servicing enterprise and really do an assessment if you're ready for it. I think we went full force into it because we're like, wow, like the opportunities to get really deep and strategic with some of these enterprise clients was really exciting and attractive. But of course, that also changes in how you service them and having the appropriate team to service them. There's procurement, legal, like there were just so many surprises that we weren't prepared for that derailed our ability to really be proactive in our business. And it was a hard lesson, I would say, but also we learned so much out of it too. I think it's just, making sure that you really assess jumping full bore into enterprise or up market, because there is that sweet spot. Like I would say that mid-sized client really was a sweet spot for us. And I think you don't want to disregard that clientele. Yeah, those are the two big ones for me, I would say.
Yeah, it's really good points there. Just want to underscore before we get your answer there, Joel. And I think it's something that I hear the quote come up in a services business, your people are your product, right? And I think every year that goes by, I tell myself, I was like, yeah, wow, I really understand how important that is. I get it. And then I'm like, wow, like I had no idea. Like it just every year it dawns on me more and more. So I love that you brought up that importance of investing in talent, because that is definitely something that any sort of entrepreneur who's just starting out there's no way you can realize how much of a difference it is, because you're just doing a lot of it yourself at that stage, right? But when you have, the inflection points in my experience as well have always been around like certain team members and certain roles. And then, yeah, like I love that you brought up the double-edged sword of enterprise clients, right? There's great things about serving enterprise clients, and they have big budgets and sell big projects, but it's such a good point to think about is it's not something to necessarily go blindly into without understanding there are pros and cons and complexities undoubtedly that come with that. Yeah, two really good points there. Joel, yeah, what about you? What are some of the biggest learnings that you had along the journey?
Yeah, I think Jen highlighted two really critical ones and two ones that were pretty formative and things that I'll take away from Case Study Buddy for sure. I think so much for me, I launched Case Study Buddy in like the 0% interest era where we capitalized a lot on times being good. And I think there's a temptation in business to always view things through the lens of the present instead of managing the future. And I think that's one of the things that I'll take away and in discussions with entrepreneurs now is don't postpone having an understanding of your numbers, your margins, your forecasts. I think that part of the business is not sexy to me. It's not how my brain works. I love it when it's there, but it's not something that I naturally know how to do or build out. But I think so much was illuminated and so much decision making could be enhanced by just having a good grasp on your numbers. I used to tell people you need three people. You need a great lawyer, a great bookkeeper, and a great accountant. But I would add a fourth at this point. You need a good finance person. You need that CFO type of person, whether that's a consultant, whether that's a service, whether that's someone in the business. But just the difference that makes to understanding your own business. Even in discussions this week, talking with some folks who run a software product and have made the classic mistake I think a lot of entrepreneurs make of not really paying themselves in the early going and then riding kind of the wave, and then you put your head and be like, oh shit, like we've spent so much to grow at all costs, like we haven't taken care of ourselves or really planned for the future. So I think, knowing your numbers it's never too early to build out a model. It feels like something that, don't waste your time on that till you're seven figures. But I think the truth is we were lucky to get to seven figures. I think we executed in an exceptional time. We were lucky to get there without that. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that's difficult, there's a lot of cliches around it, but everything you've heard about your business changing at certain financial points is true. Like it's when you get to $250,000, you're not necessarily the same business that you will be when you hit $500,000 or when you're trying to scale to 3 million. Like I think one of the shocks to the system for especially, for me personally, coming from running a very successful like solo operation where you're the only person you're accountable to, margins are very different. You have total control over the process. The first learning when you want to get beyond that is what to let go of and how to let go and how to build those foundational processes. And then if you want to grow past a certain point, you need different people. You need to invest differently. You need to spend your time differently. So everything you've heard about your business breaking every time you hit certain financial points, it's true. It's not a cliche. It really is true. And then to echo what Jen said, I think one of the hardest learnings is it feels amazing to have Amazon and major social networks and multi-billion-dollar brands coming to you, but you cannot expect servicing them to be anything like servicing your small business clients or your mid-sized clients. And I think there's so many headwinds now, even with cybersecurity, and I know you've experienced this in some degree too, Sam. Just it boggles the mind to have to be compliant with certain cybersecurity things where you're like, we're a company of 20 people, like, or less, 5 people, 10 people. If you want to serve that market, so much about your business has to change. And you understand, as a spectator, you feel like enterprise pricing, it's hokey, it's a cash grab. And then you run a business that serves me, like, if you don't do this, you're not going to survive. There's a reason enterprise pricing exists. And so, yeah, like Jen said, there's a million things we could get into, but I think those are some of the things I'll take away and into whatever I do next.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think when entrepreneurs and founders can get into trouble, to your point, is when they start trying to serve the enterprise without accounting for all the additional complexities that will occur in their pricing, right? That's such a good call out. Just to underscore a few other kind of takeaways there. You mentioned with the market timing and like how timing, that's something that I have grown to appreciate the longer I run a company. Is sometimes it's when the market's good that it's great, and sometimes you feel like a genius, but really a lot of it's just the market. And when the market's bad, you feel like an idiot, but it's not you either. It's like the market's hard too. So I think that is such a good thing and a healthy thing too for entrepreneurs. We don't need to tie our identity to the performance of our business on any given day or year, and realize that's like you're always going to be playing in the realities of the market. But even more so, it's when the market's good, let's make hay when the sun shines. And that's what you and Jen were able to do, like with case studies. Like the interest rates were low and you've made a lot of hay where the sun shines, and that's incredibly important. Changing at different points of the business, so true. Just I've heard people talk about it as like whenever anything doubles, whether it's like headcount or whether it's revenue, everything breaks. Or some people say it's like factors of 1, 3, and 10. So it's like at 1 person, 3 people, and 10 people, and then 30 people or whatever. But it's so true. But I think the biggest takeaway that is so important is like how it's never too early to have a clearer handle on the numbers. And as you said, sometimes it just means having the right like fractional advisors, because it's like bookkeeping. Like that was a lesson that took me a long time. Is bookkeeping is not the same as like having a fractional CFO or like a finance person. They're not going to give you any like strategic insight, and they're really just doing your books, and like it may or may not be correct in general, right? So I think that's such a good point, especially when things are going great. Very hard to spend the time and dig into things, but that's such a good point. Last question before we transition to more of the customer. So Joel, I know you probably have a lot of thoughts here, and Jen, maybe you do as well, but what advice would you give another person looking to transition from freelancing to building a company or starting a product as service?
When you're thinking of starting an agency, I think obviously there's the question of, should you start with the process? Should you start with hiring the best people? For me, I think the answer lies in defining the purpose. Who do you serve and why do you serve them that way? When it comes to the process, not just what do you do, but why do you do it that way? I think especially as you scale and grow beyond yourself, things that are self-evident to you, things that are obvious to you about why you do things the way you do them, won't be to anybody else. And whether it's your first hire or whether you're your 20th hire, having a really good way of articulating not just who you are and what you do, but why and why you do things the way you do, I think becomes really critical. I think the other thing is, if you are someone who loves the craft itself, if you love to write, if you love, like if landing pages are just your jam and you love them, you're like, I'm going to start a landing page agency. I think you need to realize, and I use that just as an example, but like you will be pushed out of the craft very quickly. If you love the craft, you may not ever want to grow beyond one, because growing outside of one necessitates you wear a different hat and you may never go back. I think for me, I had a failure prior to Case Study Buddy where I tried to build a writing team doing blog work, and it didn't have its own brand and everything like that, but I had dollar signs in my eyes, like I can bring in other people and I can outsource and I can, of course, if I can do it, they can do it. And the lessons that taught me were like, no one's ever going to care as much as you. Everyone has a different way of doing things, and you're very quickly going to become a people manager and a process manager, not a writer. And so you have to be prepared for that. You have to be ready and willing to stop doing the thing. at some point, and that became like a huge upside for me in time. Like when we finally hit the years where I didn't ever have to go into the weeds on a customer story again, that was liberating because I could grow and expand and was excited to learn in other areas. But I think that's really important to know going in, is if you love the work itself, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be great at building a company or a team that excels at doing that work. You're going to be forced out of that creator type of role at some point. And that can be really hard to reckon with.
Yeah, I think, to add to what Joel's saying, where he's talking about purpose and defining that purpose and the why behind what you're doing. And I think you also need to take a step further when you're making that jump from freelance to building a business. I think you need to define what your why is and what is it that you want out of this. What does your exit look like? If you were to dream that up, what does that look like? Do you want to be in the weeds? Do you want to be running a business? Do you want to be on the ops side? Because all of that informs how you hire, how you structure your business, how long you're in it. Are you going to be having this as an ongoing thing forever or not? And I think when you set that sort of endpoint and work backwards from there, it really helps achieve what you truly want out of it as well.
Such a good point. Starting with the beginning with the end in mind. Love that. And transitioning to customer storytelling and topics. Customer stories, I think, are more important than ever, right? Everyone's a little more skeptical than they used to be. And when we say it as sellers and marketers, it's marketing. But when our customers say it, it's social proof. So I think most marketers understand they need customer stories, but I think a lot of them don't necessarily know about, or a lot of them maybe don't know how to set the strategy for that. How would you think about setting a customer storytelling strategy? What's the process that a marketer should think through before they just go and create their customer stories?
I think one of the critical things people don't do is pause and think, what kinds of stories do we even need to be telling? I think for a long time, customer stories, customer proof has been relegated to this island. And unfortunately, you even still see it now. Like there's this huge emergence of the customer marketing function, but then they get isolated on this island away from sales or even other parts of marketing, when really this all needs to be interconnected. But what doesn't get done is pausing and thinking, what types of stories are going to help unlock the KPIs that we actually want to influence? If you want to be growing lead quality in a particular vertical, you should be telling stories about people in that vertical. If you're trying to appeal to a specific kind of buyer or someone who sits on the buying board, right? The type of story you tell to a CTO had better be very different from the one that you tell to the CMO, because they may not share language or perspective or decision criteria. And so I think one of the things that we learned throughout the life of Case Study Buddy was this whole concept of coverage gaps and this whole concept of intentionally mapping out where are the gaps in our stories right now? Where do we not have the sales collateral? Where do we not have the ammunition for the discussions we want to be having? Where are we light on proof for a particular buyer or industry or vertical or proof point? And I think when you can take a macro view of even a quarter, what are our goals for this quarter? What are our goals for this year? That will help you be much more intentional about which stories you choose, which candidates you reach out to. But that's also going to be helpful in mobilizing the rest of the team. When people can get aligned on a very specific vision for, hey, sales team, this quarter, these are the types of stories we're prioritizing. Don't come to us asking for other things, and don't nominate people who don't fit inside of necessarily this window. Now, you don't have to be quite that ruthless about it, but I think thinking in terms of your business priorities, your KPIs you want to influence first, and then moving from there down into, okay, these are the types of stories we should pursue. It's just not done enough. And having seen the inside of 300 plus companies, even at the multi-billion-dollar company level, that does not exist for a lot of companies. They're still catching up to this. So hitting pause and being intentional about who you're trying to reach and the story you're trying to tell them, it sounds so obvious. It's simply not done right now to the degree that it should be.
And I think also to add to that, it's like case studies are still a reactionary thing. It's not proactive. It's not built into systems all the way at the outset of a new prospect or customer relationship. We do have the odd We had the odd customer where they integrated into their agreements, but sometimes they still operated as their own island in operation when it's that everyone has a touch point with the customer at some point, and it's at each of these touch points through sales, through marketing, through customer success. What is their role as it relates to customer success stories, and how do they all participate in that? And I think it is a team approach. It's not just one island operation over here. It has to be a team approach, and everyone has to be on the same page as to how they all kind of fulfill towards that customer strategy and that customer outcome. And yeah, I think it's the greater way of achieving a more sound strategy when you have all teams on the same page.
And I think a lot of people, if they make that pause, they set a strategy, the next thing that they need to figure out is how to get their customers to agree to be, featured in those case studies and video testimonials, whatever they may be. I know this is something that you both have thought about a lot. You've had hundreds of clients that you've helped with this. It's never easy, but what advice would you give marketers around securing customers and getting them to agree to be featured in these success stories?
I think, first of all, don't block your own shots. I think there's this fear internally that kills so many case studies before they can happen. Sales says, oh, it's not the right time, or marketers think, oh, they'll never say yes to this. Like, we tend to overinflate the difficulty. Yes, it is hard. It is by far the biggest barrier for most companies is getting buy-in. And then at the same time, it's not impossible. A lot of companies, their programs wither because they take this stance, well, it's never going to work. I think really a successful ask lives at the intersection of the right timing, the right person, and the right ask. Timing can be different for every company, but mapping out your cadence of communication with the customer and identifying when are they going to be most likely to either put their hand up or have the details and be willing, when are they going to be most excited to share the win? I think who the ask comes from can play a huge role. Of course, there are success stories about teams just going and doing it, just rolling up their sleeves. Hey, it's an external marketing team. They're just going to attack a list and they get it done. And I'm not going to discount that approach, but especially on the enterprise side of things, thinking carefully about who's most familiar and who has the most clout. Some of the companies that are very successful in sensitive spaces involve their C-suite. They get someone with a big title or recognizable name and get them to be part of the ask. And that can certainly mobilize things. And then I think I could talk for a full hour just on how to make the ask. But I think when it comes to how you position the ask, when we're nervous or when we are anxious, we tend to talk a lot. It's like a reflexive kind of reaction to the way that we're feeling. And so you see a lot of asks that are very long-winded, that are very apologetic. I know you're busy, but like the tone with which they come at it, even, it's like apologetic, like they don't believe that this is worth their time. That rubs off on the customer. So thinking very carefully about how can you in your ask be direct, be clear, show them the benefit of what's in it for them, and then obliterate their fear by laying out, like, what does the process look like? How can I be sure that you're going to make me look good? You can do that in 6 sentences. You really can, as long as you're intentional about that. So sending a well-structured, succinct ask that's easy to say yes to. And that's an art form, and that's something that over time we saw some companies do really well. But the way you position that ask matters just as much. And that's why, again, I'm a huge proponent of having a go-to template that everybody can tweak, rather than leaving it up to the salesperson or the CSM or whoever. Have some language everybody can use and a formula that makes sense, and just do that on repeat.
And there's so many good points there. I think a lot of people also ask for, say, oh, we want to make this like a two-way exchange of value and give the customer who's participating value. What are your thoughts on that? Because it sounds really good in theory. Sometimes that's hard. But yeah, how do you think about, to the extent possible, the benefits you can give people for appearing in a case study or a testimonial?
I mean, I think to some degree, it's also just sharing the wins. And people love to talk about the positives of what's gone in their work efforts. And I think the exposure that can be gained for the organization, especially if you're going to be posting it in social streams or on your blog or putting it into ads, like it's an opportunity to highlight and feature the success that you were able to achieve with your customer. And it's a genuine approach to sharing knowledge into being an industry leader in this particular space. Like it's an opportunity to really help and be a part of the community that your customer's in. So I think it's how you position that, because there is absolutely that win for them and that exposure for them and their network, and to be more of a thought leader. But then also, I think providing that assurance too, that whatever you're posting, they get approval, like they get to approve what's being said about them, etc. So also giving kind of some power back to them that they can buy into it and they get this exposure out of it.
To add to that, I think there's two levels of benefit in my mind. There's the individual and the organizational, and you can get a long way tapping into the individual. An individual is much easier to impress and persuade than an entire org. And of course you have to balance both, but like we live in the era of the personal brand. People want to be seen as competent, smart, making wise decisions, leaders in their space. Can you tell stories that portray your subject as that? Can you make them look good? Can you help them on their journey to position themselves well or get a promotion or for that next job? And let's face it, people don't stay in their jobs for 20 years like they used to. There's this, especially in B2B, a ton of migration. So I think there's that component. I think the other side of it too is the companies that do this best look at it through a relational level. And the companies that do it worse look at it like, how can we bribe you into a favor? If you can create a relationship dynamic with the customer where they feel heard, where they feel like they have an advantage, where they feel like they have a voice into your relationship as a vendor and a client, that'll make a huge difference. Sometimes the reward for us mentally really is supporting a company we love and feel like is doing good things. So, again, we're seeing more and more companies build advocacy boards, build customer marketing programs, build initiatives, invite their customers to events, put them on stages. There are so many ways to reward people, but it has to come from this place of, are you building a relationship? Are you bribing people into action? Because the two are very different. They feel very different. And if you're in the place of how much do we have to shower on your head in terms of gifts and coffee gift cards and all this to get you to open your mouth, you're already losing. If you look at programs, for example, just to cite one like HubSpot, they do a really fantastic job of kind of both sides. Of course, there's a big legal machine and they have their lighthouse program and they have some obligations for customers to take part in that, along with a whole bunch of perks. And then you look at what Ron Dawson is doing with the HubSpot for Startups program, and they're telling aspirational content. Every single person who does an interview with Ron and his team comes away looking great, comes away with great exposure, comes away looking like the kind of person that someone who might be interested in HubSpot for Startups wants to be like. Ron's nailed that. So their being featured is its own incentive. So I think it really does come out to answering the question for yourself, are we bribing people or are we building this mutually beneficial relationship?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think we could, like you said, record like a whole podcast just on that. And I think that aspirational content is why it's so key for companies to actually tell their stories in a really high quality way that makes the customer look good. It can't be aspirational if the customer who's being featured doesn't love the end result and wouldn't be excited to share it with their network. So I think that is such a key point. And Ron and HubSpot for Startups is the perfect example. Jen, Joel, this has been fantastic. For people who are listening, where can they get in touch with you if they want to reach out, say hi, hear more about what you will be up to next? What's the best way for folks in the audience to reach out?
For me, it's don't be shy. Don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place for me right now. I'm just going to be taking the summer off with my kids, focus on them. Haven't had a summer off with them yet, so I look forward to that. And then come the fall, be digging into what's next. Yeah,
same goes for me. I think LinkedIn, every podcast or talk I do, I say I don't always respond quickly, but I do always respond. And sometimes it does take a couple days or weeks, but I always try to not leave people hanging. I think businesscasualcopywriting.com is like the very aged, almost 13-year-old now, or something like that, 11-year-old like hub of what I'm doing in the moment. But yeah, I'm sure at some point that will be redirected to something else, but you can always poke around there and see if there's anything new. LinkedIn's the best place.
Perfect. We'll get both of your profiles linked up in the show notes. Jen, Joel, this has been fantastic. I know both entrepreneurs and marketers are going to get a ton out of this episode. So once again, thank you for coming on and really appreciate sharing your stories and insights today.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps it up for this episode of B2B Revenue Leaders, brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Again, I am your host just for today, Sam Shepler, subbing in for Dustin, as we heard about the entrepreneurial story of Jen and Joel and how they were inspired to found Case Study Buddy, how they got the business off the ground, some of their biggest learnings growing the business and in their entrepreneurial journey, and then ultimately their biggest tips for all things customer storytelling. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And again, this is Sam Shepler on the B2B Revenue Leaders podcast, brought to you by Testimonial Hero.